From the YPS Social Impact Network, I'm Prithu Pareek, and this is the Impact in Action podcast. It starts with a simple question: what if impact were designed to last? For Sunil Lalvani, that question became Project Maji, a social enterprise building reliable water systems across Africa. In this episode, how rethinking sustainability, not as a goal, but as a practice, is transforming the way communities access water. Hi, Sunil. Welcome to the Impact in Action podcast. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, Prithu. A pleasure to be on and speak to you.
I'm going to start all the way back at the beginning, before Project Maji, when you were helping grow your family's electronics company, Benetton. What was that chapter of your life like?
Okay, that's a long chapter because that was close to 25 years. So, sort of typical Asian family business situation. My dad started the business in 1958. It was kind of my expectation and destiny to join the business. So straight out of university, joined the business, spent 2 years in Nigeria, and then opened our Russia office in 1994. Spent 8 years living there, building and growing that. And then I moved to Dubai when my kids were born, because Moscow was a challenging place at that time to raise an expat family. And from Dubai, that gave me a lot more exposure to the African side of the family business, which is where this journey took off. But yeah, 25 years learning about electronics business, a family business. That's where my exposure started.
Wow. And when was the first time you came face to face with the water crisis in a way that really stuck with you?
Yeah, so the water crisis, like I think a lot of people sort of see it on TV, read articles, Nat Geo magazine things, which I think I'd seen before as well. But it was actually in 2014 when I was in Ghana, driving on a dirt road on a business trip, where literally my driver stopped because there were two kids drinking water from a puddle, literally in front of us in the road, and that was a transformative moment in my life. Getting down, speaking to them, understanding this is their sort of daily reality, woke me up to it, and yeah, changed my life.
Wow, that's such a vivid moment. It's easy to see why it stayed with you. What was the tipping point where you thought, you know, this is what I want to work on. This is my problem to solve.
That's really interesting because I think about this, and I speak about this quite a lot, what I do. And I think the tipping point was obviously seeing those kids had a dramatic impact on me. But I think it was also just my time in life. I was 45 at the time. I was sort of, let me say, financially independent. I'd had a long working career. I felt that I was probably subconsciously, I guess I felt it wasn't a conscious thing, but I just felt comfortable that now is a time I think I can do this. My kids were late teenagers at the time, so they were going to be going off soon. Yeah, and I think just all these things came together at that time in life, and I felt this is something I could do, as opposed to what I might have done 5, 10 years earlier, was sort of write a check to another NGO and said, "Hey, you guys tackle this problem." I felt, let me have a go at it.
And that's honestly a big shift from the private sector to working on this. How did you make that decision leaving to start this new venture? What sort of went into that in your mind?
So it's interesting the way you phrase it there, because I don't think I did or have left the private sector, and that's really the approach that I took to this, and I think that's actually been one of the big reasons for our success in what we do, because there are a lot of very good NGOs and charities out there doing some fantastic work, and I'm not going to knock any of them, and they all do work with a really really good heart. But I think there is something broken in that sector. There is a challenge with organizations having to rely 100% on donations. We learned that early this year with the whole USAID thing. If whatever you might think of USAID, but having an organization that is reliant on donation funds to come in, and if that doesn't come in, you're dead. I came at it naturally with a business mindset, because that's all I knew. I thought, how can I help these kids? And I thought, actually, the first thing in my mindset was, how can I help them in a for-profit manner? because that's what I knew. And actually, when I started to do this and drill down on the numbers, I then realized that actually financially, this is not going to work as a for profit. But that doesn't mean we can take a lot of the principles that I knew from the private sector world, run the organization for all intents and purposes as if we were a private for-profit enterprise. But just we had to be a bit creative with how the revenue and the funding was going to come in. And I think that's been the trick. And I think that's what I talk a lot about, and talk to a lot about YPOs and other people about this concept of social enterprise. Run an organization as if it's a business, a normal business, but the only difference is your driving KPIs are not going to be turnover and profit. They're going to be number of lives affected, consistency of supply of equipment, etc.
Can you take me back to the early days? What did the first version of Project Maji look like?
So Project Maji, we're a social enterprise, and the long form of how I describe it is we're a not-for-profit social enterprise, and our core is to serve sustainable access to water to rural communities. That's very deliberate phraseology there. And as I said, we're a social enterprise, as I started off, because we run ourselves like a business, but we're not a not-for-profit. And the not-for-profit part is really important to explain, because I think that gets a bit misunderstood with its general vernacular. Not-for-profit is, to me, a legal terminology. It's not a business philosophy or an organizational philosophy, because we don't strive to not make a profit. We don't strive to lose money. We strive to make a financial surplus so we can be financially sustainable. But our legal status is non-profit because we do take in donations, and we don't pay tax on any surpluses that we do make, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. But then we provide sustainable access to water to rural communities, and again that's very deliberate, because I must go back. When I said I saw these two kids in the village in the road drinking water, I went back to the village with them to understand more about their situation. And in speaking to the community, to the elders, to the chief, they in fact showed me that there was a solution to solving this problem, which at that time was a hand pump. This is this thing that gets installed. It's about 100-year-old technology, but you pump up water from underground with a lot of physical effort and deliver water. Now, I saw that hand pump in that community, but it had broken down. And again, that's such a serendipitous moment for me, because I really think back that had I seen that village and had I seen a working hand pump, I really might have gone back and thought, "Oh, fantastic! A hand pump solves this problem. Let's start deploying hand pumps." Because I saw it was broken, that really triggered off a different level of thinking in my mind. We'd given as a business some CSR checks to schools and clinics, and thought, 5, 10, 20 years later, oh, we donated to that school 20 years ago. It must be functioning really well. Without ever actually going back and checking who's paying for the teachers, who's paying for the books, who's paying for the school building upkeep. This is the first time myself I'd really thought about this word sustainability. It's all very well building a hand pump in a village.
Yep.
But who's maintaining it? Is it working after 1, 2, 3, 5 years? And I thought there could be nothing worse than trying to work with these communities who have never had water in their lives. Then you give them this beautiful gift of water, and then it's snatched away from them again. It's almost better not to help them in the first place, I might argue. So I really thought, let's make sure we don't give them access to water, but we give them sustainable access to water. If anything goes wrong, we're going to be there to fix it. And that's where our social enterprise model came in. We were going to be reliant on donations to come and support the hardware build out of our network. We now have close to 500 facilities serving nearly 500,000 people. And that's donor driven in terms of building the hardware out. But we maintain every one of our kiosks generated by water revenue that we sell water in the villages. Now we sell water at a very nominal price. It's about 2 US cents for a jerry can of water, 20 liters of water. That's a price that we sit and we discuss and negotiate and agree with the community before we go in. But it's so critical that water revenue then ensures sustainability of that supply, ensures that we have a team that can be paid for and fix these facilities if and when they break down, rather than becoming white elephants along the way. The first version of our Project Maji kiosk was an engineering marvel, is the way that I say it. It was absolutely amazing. I was thrilled, and there's no sarcasm here. Huh? I mean, it was something I was really thrilled to build and deploy. It pumped about 15 to 20,000 liters of water every day. It had reverse osmosis filtration. It had battery backup so it could work 24/7 for this village. Really amazing. But when we deployed it in the village, I realized we had completely over-engineered this thing. And this was a really important lesson that I learned, was having seen those kids needing water and then deciding myself that we're going to tackle this problem. I took some of my engineers and we sat in our Dubai conference room to discuss, how we're going to tackle this. And that's where we designed this engineering marvel. And that was sort of lesson number one that I learned. Critical lesson number one was, when you are designing something to serve people in an African village, you don't design it sitting in a Dubai conference room. You design it sitting in an African village. So,
Yep.
a lot of people talk about when they're doing product development about, MVP, minimum viable product, design something and deploy it. I always say that we designed an MVP, but it was sort of a maximum viable product. It still worked and it still served the community, but it was really a lesson going on. So instead of a typical minimum viable product, you deploy it and you build on that. We started with this maximum viable product and started to strip things away from it. We started to realize we don't need so much capacity. We don't need the battery backup because we can pump more water. We don't need the reverse osmosis because the water actually is pretty clean at source. But ultimately, it was an iterative process that then took us down to now what we have today, which is also an engineering marvel, I would say, but something that is really purpose-built and designed to work in the environment that we deploy it in.
I see. Yeah, and that's really interesting what you're saying is it's sort of really the opposite of what you see most companies today do is you're starting with something small and building up. You kind of started with something big and then figured out what you actually need and just kept that. Have you noticed that other organizations do things that are similar to this where they try and maintain the sustainability of the initiatives, or is that not as common?
There are organizations that do it, and we partner with a lot of them, but it's not the norm.
Okay.
It's not the norm, and I think it really needs to become the norm. Look, there are a number of people that I speak to in the impact space, in the impact investment space specifically, and they're always harping on about, you've got to find a for-profit way to fix this, or a way that doesn't rely on donations. And I think that would be great. If we could be completely unreliant on donations, even for the capex hardware build out, that would be amazing. But we have to look at the reality of the situation that we find ourselves in. We deliberately serve small communities, and small communities to us is maybe 1,000 people or less. And I chose that sort of defining sector because that was the community I saw where those two kids came from. And I questioned, why don't they have water? They don't have water because those are the ones that are hardest to reach. And then you've got to look at entrepreneurism across the world. And capitalism and entrepreneurship is a fantastic tool, actually. I have some questions on how far capitalism's gone, but let's for now just say it can be a really, really good tool to solve problems. But when you look at rural water, you have life, apart from air, water is life's most essential product. Full stop. We are, in the villages we go to, we are a monopoly supplier. Okay? So you've got to believe, if you have life's most essential product and you're a monopoly supplier, surely there has to be a business opportunity there. But when you realize that 800 million people don't have access to water, how have local entrepreneurs not figured this out somewhere along the way?
Yeah.
If you had a few 100,000 people without water, a couple of million without water, sure. 800 million, what's 1 in 10 people don't have access to
Wow.
water.
Yeah.
There has to be a fundamental market gap there. I really tried to explain that, we have to rely on a donation model to pay for our capex build out. The fact that we can then run our model off water revenue to make it sustainable, that's already a big win. And the other way I look at it is water is such an essential commodity, not only for life, obviously, but for communities to thrive. I look at it as catalytic infrastructure for communities. that actually once we put the water facility in the community, then so many other opportunities open up for entrepreneurship. Local businesses can crop up.
Yep.
Laundrette businesses can crop up, for example, because they've got water to serve. Agriculture businesses can crop up because they've got water for irrigation. Because women now don't have to walk hours to collect water, they have it right in the heart of their community. They can start local businesses. So it's very catalytic. But I think at the heart of it, it still requires a donation infrastructure to bring our facilities in.
Yep. It has a lot of a ripple effect, sort of spreads out from that one point.
Absolutely.
In building and working on this project, was there a moment where you thought that this isn't going to work, and how did you push through it?
I'm an entrepreneur, so I can tell you every single day I think this is not going to work. When I started Project Maji, it was a passion project. It was a CSR initiative within the family business. So I didn't think about it not working. It was just we're going to help this community, and we're going to finance it. So and from a technology point of view, as I said, we went complete overkill. So it didn't happen from day one. But then as I deployed site number one, and I started to learn about the crisis, and I realized that 800 million people don't have access to water. I realized that building 1, 2, 3 sites was okay. Honestly, in my mind, it was going to be a waste of time. It was either go big or go home.
I see.
So I set a target immediately before we'd even built site number one. I set a target that we have to serve 1 million people by 2025, and we hadn't built site number one. I didn't know how we were going to do this. I didn't know how we were going to fund it. I didn't know the technology we were going to use. But I just figured we had to have a bold ambition. And yeah, I was only half joking earlier on. Yeah, every day along the way, I struggled with how we're going to solve this problem, how we're going to solve that problem. This is not going to work. We're going to fail. We're not going to make it. But yeah, and that's why social enterprise comes back to it again, because like any entrepreneur, and like YPO is, we sort of, you have a passion and a drive. You have ego attached to it, right? Sort of, I can't let this fail.
Yep.
But this was interesting. I couldn't let this fail. Yeah, one, because again, I was attached to it, and egotistically, I have to be honest, my pride wouldn't let me fail. But you know, I now had lives relying on me. Uh, that we couldn't, and still today we can't let it fail. Today we didn't reach that 1 million people by 2025. We reached about 500,000 people, but 500,000 people rely on us every single day to make sure that our facilities are up and running. So we face challenges all the time: community challenges, governmental challenges, technical challenges. We fight through it. We find a way, and drive and grit and passion of me and my team is what makes sure that we're still here.
Yeah, you have to. You have to keep pushing through. For YPOers or YNGers or anyone else listening who feels inspired, what's the most meaningful way that they can get involved with Project Maji right now, or just in the water sector in general?
So if people want to get involved with Project Maji, then by all means they can reach out to me. I assume all my contacts are going to be available in the links here. But we're always looking for financial support. That's always open. But we're also looking for partnerships, technology support, introductions, and even just conversations, because conversations just lead to other things. So by all means, people can reach out to me. I actually often speak to forums, not so much necessarily about the water sector and Project Maji, but about also, I think, I mentioned about capitalism earlier on. I think capitalism has proven to be, for the past 70 years, a fantastic tool for innovation and for solving a lot of the world's problems. But I do feel quite passionately that we've got a bit lost. I've been very fortunate in my own life financially to be very comfortably off. But then I've seen this situation, across rural Africa, and not only with the water. It's with food, it's with healthcare, it's with so many basic essentials. And that juxtaposition of how we can live the comfortable, fortunate lives that we do, and have a 5-hour flight away, an 8-hour flight away, people who are struggling to live without basic necessities. I do think it becomes incumbent upon us to be able to do something towards that. And I don't mean in the sense of we have to become martyrs. We have to give up everything that we've got and suddenly become Mother Teresa and move over there and give everything away. I'm very vocal about that. I'm very comfortable in my life. As I said, I worked 25 years. I own my house. I'm financially comfortable. My kids had finished school and university. All my big expenses are done. I've got everything I need to lead a comfortable life, And then there becomes that question of how much is enough and how much more do you need to work for and earn. And if we can then dedicate that part of our lives and energy towards then helping others. I'm very passionate about supporting that. And I think that does a couple of things. I think one, it makes the world a better place generally. I think it's very soul fulfilling as well. So even from a selfish perspective, I love what I do because it's so satisfying. And because I've set it up as a social enterprise, it's very intellectually stimulating for me. But I've got all the same intellectual challenges of the startup, running a new business and learning things. So I've got the intellectual stimulation, I've got the challenges, I've got the soul nourishment, and I'm helping so many other people. So people can, other YPOs, YNGers can go on a journey. Can they help Project Maji? Sure, reach out, and I'm happy to. But I think a more important message I like to spread across is, look, I think we have an opportunity, and I'd even say an obligation, that you're comfortable yourselves. Let's look at helping the millions and billions who are perhaps less fortunate than ourselves.
That's a beautiful place to leave it, and such a great message for us to end on. Sunil, thank you so much for sharing your journey and your story with us today.
Prithu, it's been a pleasure.